Hello everyone and welcome into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on this lovely Wednesday afternoon, wherever you are watching us from. Welcome. This is going to be a great show for a midweek show, as always. Kicking things off with our NBA Power Rankings. We always have to do it on this Wednesday. Then we continue with our rankings of the top 5 at each respective position in the MLB. This time it is the third baseman, the guys in the hot corner, and our shortstops, one of the most integral positions in all of sports, if you ask me. Then we look ahead to the college basketball weekend. A lot of different conference matchups that catch my eye and might catch your eye as well, especially in the top-heavy SEC. And then last but not least, I want to do a fun little segment, maybe not as serious as some of the other ones we're going to be talking about today. Potentially shocking decision made by Cooper Flagg a couple of weeks ago, where he stated his intent that perhaps he might want to stay one more year at Duke. Look into that what we will, but it certainly does intrigue me just a little bit, enough to include it for today's show. But before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network if you haven't done so already, to keep up to date with all our new content. And if you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcsportsnetwork.net. Again, the best way to get your opinions, feedback, input, even tips and donations out there. They're genuinely appreciated by all concerned, not just me doing my own thing with this Dead Ball Sports Podcast, but others around the network as well. And it just makes our shows that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to them. But without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment, which is our NBA Power Rankings. And we're going to do something fun here, something that we never really done with this segment. I'm going to look ahead through the schedules of all of these top 5 teams and talk about the most important stretch of games remaining for each and every single one of them. Now, I know that this is something new, and I know that I'm only going to have one day to implement it, but I think it's going to be really intriguing because a lot of these top 5 teams, some of them are performing as we expect they would be, but others are seemingly sliding down the rankings, and this 5th place team in particular could see themselves out of a top 5 spot within the coming weeks. You're not going to hear it from me, but maybe you'll hear it from other pundits and analysts along the way. Without further ado, let's take this out for a trial run, even though it's the only one I'll be doing, and let's see how this last edition, really, of my NBA Power Rankings takes off. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Speaking of the top 5 teams, at number 5, the team most likely to fall out of this list in the coming weeks, in my humble opinion, the New York Knicks. Their record now against the Cavs, Thunder, and Celtics, the top 3 teams in the league, is now 0-7 after back-to-back losses against both the Cavs and the Celtics just 2 weeks ago. They still have the league's 5th best record, but they are slowly plummeting down these rankings. And the bad news for them really is that they're not done with teams like the Cavs and Celtics in the regular season. And if they don't win any of those remaining games, then I have little reason to believe that this team is going to compete in the postseason. Yes, doesn't necessarily come until April, so they have a little bit of time before then to try and stockpile as many wins as possible. But ultimately, it's those top 3 teams that you have to beat, and they have failed to do so. And really, most of the games against those top 3 competition were really non-competitive. They really didn't show any fight, especially in that beatdown at home, courtesy of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So if I'm a Knicks fan, I'm worrying at the state of this team against elite competition, because right now they're not at a place where you can say they can go into, say, TD Garden or Quicken Loans and beat the Cleveland Cavaliers or Boston Celtics right now, or for that matter, any team in the Eastern Conference, really. This Knicks team is really vulnerable to anyone, in my humble opinion. So that's the reason why I think they will be the most likely team to drop out of these rankings. Not just in my opinion, because this is the last time I'm doing these rankings, but in other analysts and pundits' opinions along the way as well. So that's the current state of the New York Knicks. Try as they might not, as Hawaiian 5-0 taps in. I don't necessarily see the comment thus far, my friend, but let me know what you are thinking about this current ranking. As we get into number 4, a team truly performing like a top 5 team, maybe one of the best teams, if not the best team, in the Western Conference based on current form at the moment. The Denver Nuggets have won 10 of their last 11 games, and they're looking like true contenders, especially now that players are performing around all-world player Nikola Jokic. But the most intriguing matchups for that matter remaining for the Denver Nuggets come next month. Back-to-back games against the Oklahoma City Thunder on the road on March 9th and 10th, a week before my birthday in fact, that could showcase two of the best teams in the Western Conference and two of the best players in the Western Conference. Right now, as we are currently speaking, the MVP straw polls have Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander basically neck to neck as Hawaiian 5-0 shouts me out, I guess. Thank you for the shout out, my friend. I hope you enjoy the show and this particular segment. But Denver is a team that right now is playing their best basketball of the season, and they have a couple of weeks before they have to go to OKC and prove it against what on paper and in terms of record is the best team in the Western Conference and are playing equally as well. So that's why I think the Denver Nuggets have a chance to move up, but I just want to see them play against OKC and prove that they can compete against a team of that caliber. They did lose to the Lakers, and who knows if that's a meaningful loss or not, because they might face each other again and the Nuggets might come out on top in a postseason setting, because I don't know how the Lakers will look in the postseason. But I digress, because this Denver Nuggets team right now at this current moment are playing like a top 5 unit. But then let's get into the third team on this list, and that is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Certainly still a legitimate threat to win the Eastern Conference, the legitimate threat to reach the NBA Finals and win it all. And I really like how they're playing right now. Have had a couple of bizarre losses here and there, especially in the past few weeks, but still a very well-rounded, balanced unit. And then I feel like the most important stretch for the Cavs doesn't necessarily concern them, but other teams as well. For example, when you look at other contenders around them, like the Celtics, we're going to talk about the Thunder, the Nuggets, they all play important games that could concern the Cavs in terms of how both of those teams playing within them look. Who are the true competitors right now in terms of this top 3? And so the Thunder playing against the Nuggets again in about a couple of weeks' time, and then going to face Boston has huge ramifications for the Cavs, because it could prove that Denver is a nice contender in the Western Conference, and it could also prove that the Thunder are most likely the team that they're going to meet in the NBA Finals. And so I feel that that is important for them, as well as their remaining games coming up this Friday, in fact, against the Boston Celtics. And then, obviously, the games of the Knicks, which I feel almost certain that they will come out on top against, because they have not lost to the Knicks anytime soon. And so, another interesting game here is a back-to-back against the Indiana Pacers at the end of the season. Because usually, if you are a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers in position to wrap up the Eastern Conference ahead of time, you wouldn't necessarily place that much weight in a game, especially a back-to-back series against a team like Indiana. But Indiana did beat Cleveland before at home, and they are a team that, yes, are going to come into the back end of the playoff picture, but could sneak up on them at the end of the season. But I'm not too worried about games like the Knicks. I might be worried a little bit about this Boston game considering how well they are playing, and we'll talk about that as well. But for right now, Cleveland are looking every part of the Eastern Conference and NBA Finals contenders they have played like all season long. Now let's talk about them, Boston Celtics, another team that has won 10 out of their last 11 games. And there are 3 games specifically that I think will truly prove what the Boston Celtics are this season, and if they are the team we have seen these past couple of weeks. They have games that are all at TD Garden, most importantly, that will define their legitimacy as an NBA Finals contender. This Friday against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Sunday against the Denver Nuggets, 2 very tough games in their slate, and then March 12th, like we mentioned before, against the Thunder. All 3 of those teams are likely the biggest competitors to the Boston Celtics' repeat chances. And so, if they win at least 2 of those games, chances are we're looking at the Celtics as a true contender to not just get an advance to the NBA Finals, but to win the whole thing. Because they have played as of late very well. This team has been getting in rhythm as a collective. So, I would see no reason that if they win a couple of these games, that they wouldn't cement themselves as one of, if not the team to beat in the NBA. But they're all staring up, at least in terms of record right now, at the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like I mentioned before, that back-to-back against Denver might be their toughest remaining 2-game stretch, and then they play Boston again on March 12th. So that will prove to me if this young group of Thunder stars has a legitimate chance of reaching the NBA Finals. But they have the MVP caliber talent in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They have the lineup they can continuously throw at teams to suggest that they are no fluke, and they have done so already. They have impressive wins thus far against the Celtics. I believe they have 1 win at the very least against the Cavs. They have had a bizarre loss in the recent weeks against the Timberwolves, where they allowed them to come back from a 24-point deficit. But I still believe in this Thunder squad more than I do potentially some other Western Conference teams. Like the Lakers, they could definitely break into this top 5, but come postseason time, are they going to be legitimate? And then Memphis, they're too volatile in terms of how they play with and without Ja Morant for me to really trust them enough to sustain that success headed into the postseason. So that rounds out my final top 5 here at GSMC. I hope you appreciated all my NBA rankings. But coming next, we transition over to my MLB rankings, continuing with talks on my top 5 at each respective position, talking about the guys at the hot corner this time around. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our second segment of today's show, we're going to be continuing with our top 5 rankings at each respective position around the MLB. And this time around, it is our guys on the hot corner, one of my favorite positions to analyze in all of sports, third baseman. Not as for their defensive importance, but their offensive prowess as well. And again, I try to keep this list as balanced as possible between guys who lean a little bit more towards defensive success than offensive prowess. But I found that it has become a little bit more based on power. Also, on this list, a lot of questions are going to be asked about where certain players might actually end up. Specifically that situation over there in Boston to kind of foreshadow what's to come on this list. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. I think this is going to be a very enjoyable list, one of my favorite positions, like I said, to talk about. And I think a lot of you will potentially agree with this top 5. And if you don't, let me know what you think in the comments. I'm always open to other opinions. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Starting off at number 5, a guy who hasn't always been too consistent for Atlanta, but who hasn't not been consistent for Atlanta in the past couple of years. It's Austin Riley. And think about Austin Riley. This is still someone who only turns 28 this year and is still on year 4 of a 10-year contract. But I think the importance of him in this squad kind of translates over to last season, when already injuries to Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna Jr. were huge blows to the Braves championship hopes last year. But I think a lot of people didn't realize that when Austin Riley broke his hand at the end of August, that also impacted the team as well. So I truly think that Austin Riley may not be as appreciated as some of the other Braves stars, but he truly is such an important cog in the Braves machine, to the point where that injury kind of was even more detrimental to their squad than their top pitcher going down and potentially their top overall player going down as well. He just adds so much defensive solidity combined with his offensive prowess, even though it was a down year for him by his lofty standards, only 19 home runs, 56 RBIs, 256 batting average. But I still believe that he is such an important piece that we couldn't leave him off this list. And he's still young, still in the prime of his career, still early in his contract, going to just about hit the halfway mark here with this year. So look for him to continue to see his star ascend in the MLB as the Braves potentially contend for a World Series title this year. Then at number 4, let's talk about Mr. Manny Machado, truly a generational talent. A lot of people kind of forget how elite he's been over the years, no matter where he's bounced to as well. But this is a year where Manny Machado could reach 2,000 hits, and possible that he gets somewhere to the point where potentially next year he'll be able to hit his 400th home run. And in order to truly cement Manny Machado's legacy, even if San Diego, in this weird period of purgatory for them, does not contend for a World Series title over the next couple of years of his contract, let's put into perspective how elite he's been. He could pass, in the next couple of years, Sammy Sosa, Dick Allen, Mike Piazza, and Vladimir Guerrero Sr. in career WAR. That would be highly elite company for a player of Manny Machado's caliber. 275 last year, 29 home runs, 105 RBIs. Him and Tatis really are going to carry the load for this Padres team this season, even though it's going to be tough to try and contend with the Dodgers year in, year out, as they just continue to stockpile talent as well. So, looking at Manny Machado, it might remain an aberration, the player he is. But you can't forget about him just because he hasn't performed to a World Series standard as of yet. In the Padres, yes, they're still a solid enough team to where they could get into the playoff picture potentially as a wild card and wreak havoc once they get there. But I just don't see them in an elite tier. That could potentially leave people a little bit apprehensive and uncertain about the future of Manny Machado and what it could mean for his legacy. But I refuse to let the lack of championship credentials negate anything he's already done in his career, because it's truly remarkable, and he will stand the test of time as one of the elite third basemen of this generation when it's all said and done. And maybe it might not come with a World Series, but that doesn't necessarily have to matter concerning how many stats he's put up over the past couple of years. So Manny Machado sits here at number 4. Now, let's get a little bit weird here. Let's talk about the conundrum that now is what's to do with this Boston Red Sox infield. Because with the signing of Alex Bregman, there now is going to be a lot of tension and contention, no pun intended with that rhyme scheme there, for those infield spots. Let's not forget that the prospects that they have in the infield most likely could come up this year. Marcelo Meyer and Roman Anthony are both elite enough, both hitting and defensive-wise, to get called up this year. And if they do, it leaves a lot of things in question for both Rafael Devers and Alex Bregman, my second and third ranked third baseman, respectively. You see how I had to use quotes there. Let's talk about Devers first, because he was rather insistent that should the Red Sox bring in Alex Bregman, that he would remain at third base. But now, it's looking like because of the allure of an Alex Bregman potentially hitting in this ballpark, in Fenway, he could move to a DH role. And it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing for a player of Devers' caliber, because chances are, when you think offensively, Rafael Devers is someone who can set up players like Bregman in this lineup to where you can produce a maximum amount of runs in an inning. So I really don't mind it if Rafael Devers has to shift to the DH role to allow Alex Bregman to play in his natural position. But I do feel that in terms of natural talent, there is more to like about Devers than Bregman. I think Bregman, where he's at right now in his career, he's still an elite power hitter in certain regards. He hasn't necessarily had the best of slash lines playing at Fenway in the 21 career games he has played there. But when I look at the profile and the long-term future of the Boston Red Sox, I think there's more to invest in with Devers than there is in Bregman. And I really don't understand why the Red Sox would bring in a guy like Bregman to further muddy up the waters here in that Boston Red Sox infield. Because I think that both Meyer and Anthony are talented enough to hold down these respective positions at the very least for the decade and a half. So bringing in a guy like Bregman to kind of stunt that development doesn't make much sense to me. So that's why, even though I wouldn't be mad to see Rafael Devers hit in a more natural role as a DH and allow for Bregman to kind of ease into his own role on this new team, I feel that it's a disservice to these younger guys trying to break through in this league. And so, while I truly believe that both of them, if you view them as third basemen, are elite talents, I don't necessarily know what the future of the Red Sox is going to look like with both of them there, combined with the talent they have. So, while I think that Devers and Bregman are correctly placed on this list, because Bregman is steadily declining and could drop out of the top 5 entirely, and Devers has more promise both defensively, in my opinion, and as a pure hitter, I think that ultimately it's going to come down to how the Red Sox view both of them going forward and how the rise of these younger players will impact the organization's thinking. But everyone is staring up at one of the top players at this position for the past decade or so, really. Truly has made the definition of a power-hitting third baseman his own. Truly an elite Hall of Fame level career. And he's still playing incredibly well into an age where a lot of people would expect him to retire. Jose Ramirez. Yes, Right now, he's probably the biggest liability for the Guardians defensively, but his numbers are not going down in the slightest. This is a man who hit 39 home runs last year, 5th in the major leagues, and drove in 118 runs, and that was 3rd. And he's still hitting for average as well, a solid 279 mark as well. And when his career is all said and done, this is someone who is emblematic of a guy who just is a pure hitting powerhouse. This is someone who has hit for average and power throughout his career. Not just someone who views hitting as just a producer of runs. He views hitting both ways. He knows the power he has, and he knows when to employ, but he also knows, as this team has transitioned throughout the years to a little bit more of a defensive-minded one, how to rein it back and hit for more of an average total. So Jose Ramirez has just been elite in terms of his adaptability, both offensively and defensively. And I don't think he's showing any signs of slowing down, at least on the offensive side. Maybe he's a defensive liability, but don't let the numbers fool you in terms of how powerful he still is as a hitter, even if he declines this season. Let me know what you think in the comments below, because coming as we transition to the shortstop position, who are the top players in that area of the field right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, and for our third segment of today's show, we're going to be talking about the top 5 shortstops in the MLB this season. And I truly believe this is one of the most special positions in terms of overall talent that we can look at for this list. It's the most integral position potentially in all of sports, and I think the talent levels of all 5 of these players, no matter how young or how old they may be, truly transcend some of these other players around the league at different positions. It would be the most fun one to analyze in all my lists, even though we still have a couple of fun ones coming up. But without further ado, let's jump right into our top 5 shortstops heading into this particular MLB season. So off at number 5, a lot of people might say that his first real season as a starting shortstop for the Kansas City Royals vaulted him so far ahead of all the other shortstops in the league that he could be the number 1 shortstop right now. But I still think he has a couple of years to further... Actually, no. I'm getting myself mixed up. I'm not quite there just yet. This guy has established himself enough in the league at the number 5 spot, but is also someone who you could say is due for a decline in the next couple of years. Still elite enough, though, to make it into this year's top 5, and that is Mr. Mookie Betts. I don't know why I mixed up him and Bobby Witt Jr. Spoiler alert as to who number 4 is, but this is still someone who, even though I mixed him up as an established shortstop in this league, and someone who, is a little bit understated in how he performs offensively, but still someone who is so versatile in wherever he can play defensively that he is perhaps the most integral part of the LA Dodgers, even amongst all the star-studded players on that roster. And the reason why is, no matter how many times they change his position, he's always up for the challenge, always adapting to the new challenges. And he still is someone who, even though he's not the prettiest, sexiest hitter in terms of being a power guy, he still hits. He could reach 300 home runs and 200 stolen bases this season, and that just goes to show how wily and creative of a player Mookie Betts is on the base paths offensively. Just someone who produces no matter what for his team. And that's what I love to see out of any shortstop, really. Someone who has revolutionized the position so much that a lot of these younger guys are or can still learn from him throughout their careers as well. So kudos to Mookie for remaining in the top 5 thus far. Maybe he drops out if there's a steady decline in his game this season, but who knows. Then at number 4, finally we get to talk about a guy who is the next big thing coming up, Bobby Witt Jr. And like I said, a lot of people think that just after one full season at the starting shortstop for the Kansas City Royals, he might be the number 1 overall shortstop in the league. And he is an outstanding defender. And again, someone like Ketel Marte, if Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge did not exist, Bobby Witt certainly would have gotten more votes for the MVP last year. And like I said, he is a truly good defensive shortstop. Only Dansby Swanson generated more outs above average last season. And it's a challenging position for a young guy to excel in. And he excelled in so many ways, not just defensively. Look what he did offensively as well. Led the entire majors in batting average with a .332 average and hits as well. He scored 125 runs, drove in 109, stole 31 bases. And I feel that because of this, the Royals have a guy they can rely on for life, or the very least a decade and a half. I'm exaggerating a little bit because he's still such a young player. I just want to remind you of that. And his talent really proved that the sky is the limit for him. And for a Royals team that really is not going to play sexy baseball, for someone to be so prolific on offense yet still maintain the defensive intensity that is required to play for a team like Kansas City is remarkable, especially at the young age. So look for his star to continue to ascend. And like I said, for him to maintain his dominance on this list. And who knows? Maybe I'll be right. In the next couple of years, he truly can cement himself as the number 1 overall shortstop in the game because he has a lot of good years left in him, potentially unlike some other guys on this list as well. But then let's get into the number 3 guy, Francisco Lindor, another guy who last year, if Shohei Ohtani did not exist, could have won the MVP. We're hearing all the chants in terms of those Citi Field fans as they made that deep run in the postseason. And I feel confident that even with the addition of Juan Soto, even with all the talent at the top of that batting order, Francisco Lindor is the leadoff guy. He's the heartbeat of this team. He's going to set the tone each and every at-bat. And no matter what he does, we know that he's going to be a true leader for this organization for the time being. Because I don't really know where his career is going to take him next. Because he is getting up there in age. And I don't know if he's going to continue to be the face of the franchise over the next couple of years. Because Juan Soto is quickly going to become that guy. But for now, he truly is someone who's going to set the tone for the Mets. In 109 games batting first last year. He had 303, 374, 552 slash line. And I think that the perfect way to set this up so that both of these guys don't feel hard done by is just have Soto slotted behind them. Because I love that if Francisco's able to set the tone, hit a couple homers at that slot over the first couple of games, then Soto will start to settle into his role offensively as well. And also, the reason why Lindor is still someone who I highly respect, maybe starting to respect a little bit more than someone like Mookie Betts, is because of his hitting prowess. He could reach 1,000 runs in his career this season, 8 more hits before he gets 1,500. And as long as the Mets remain in contention, as long as this championship window stays open, Francisco Lindor will continue to make his march towards Cooperstown heard. And ultimately, I do believe that if Shohei Ohtani was not as crazy of a player as he is, Francisco Lindor would have gladly taken that NL MVP award back to New York with him. So that's how much I respect a guy like Francisco Lindor. And here's to many more years of him being a Met. I hope he remains someone who this team can rely on, even with the addition of Soto. Potentially the guy who holds this locker room all together, And that just speaks to his immense talent, both on and off the field, as that glue guy, as that leader, as the guy in the lineup, most importantly, who sets the tone for everyone else. So that's why he commands a little bit more respect than, say, a Mookie Betts right now, even though Mookie could be seen to have more of a Hall of Fame case than him. I still respect Francisco Lindor for what he's doing for the Mets, and hopefully they can break through themselves and win a couple World Series in the short term. But then at number 2, one of my favorite guys, had a lot of injuries throughout his career. I'm so happy he came to Texas, got that championship, got that second World Series MVP, Mr. Corey Seager, one of the great shortstops of his generation as well. Corey Seager is absolutely an incredible athlete and player. And if the Texas Rangers want to continue to have success, continue to try and be a contender in the AL West, they're going to need more production out of both him and Semien, who we talked about yesterday. Yes, like I just mentioned before, he is prone to injury, but he still is someone who has had 4 seasons of at least 5 WAR over the past couple of years. And to prove his hitting prowess, his final home run of last season was the 200th of his career. So even in an era where home run hitting is not seen as prolific as before, Corey Seager has been one of the kings of the home run over the past couple of years. And like I said, this is a Rangers squad trying to get back to where they were 2 years ago. And a lot of that is going to come down to health. They have a lot of older guys in this lineup, but they have a lot of younger guys as well who maybe started their development because they too were injured last year. Josh Young, Evan Carter coming back next year to supplement this roster. So if Corey Seager and Marcus Semien set the tone for these guys, stay healthy most importantly, and continue to hit for both average and power, then I guarantee you that this Rangers team can continue to be a threat. But it's going to come down to how the collective roster manages to stay healthy. And if they don't, then it could be another kind of tumbleweed season for the Texas Rangers, unfortunately. And I don't really know if that whole Bochy wins every second year thing really matters if you don't get the best out of your players. So that's what we'll be looking for this season with Texas, and specifically with Corey Seager, because he is someone who they're relying on to hold down the shortstop position for the next couple of years. But the player who I put at number 1, another younger guy coming up through the ranks, is another guy who has a lot to prove with Baltimore, and that is Gunnar Henderson. He is someone who in his sophomore season had a really impressive year, but because he's on the Baltimore Orioles, a team who a lot of people think have all the raw talent and youth to make deep runs year in, year out in the postseason, haven't really done anything with this young talent as of yet. But Gunnar Henderson is not really the problem because he's been one of their best players. So let's talk about that sophomore campaign. He had 75 extra base hits, 37 homers, an OPS plus of 159. And to compare, let's talk about another former Orioles shortstop here. A Hall of Fame shortstop at that. One of the guys who preaches longevity, is the king of longevity in any sport, breaking the record for most games played, Cal Ripken. Let's talk about that. Let's compare them. Ripken had 12.9 WAR at the start of his career, throughout his entire career. Henderson had 15.2. Ripken beats him in hits, 369 to 320, but in homers, Henderson wipes him 65 to 55. OPS plus as well, 143 to 130. So he's well on his way to being one of the greats in terms of Baltimore Orioles shortstops. That's a huge task to fulfill, but I think he's doing it right on track, maybe ahead of the curve in terms of taking over Cal Ripken's status as one of the great Baltimore Orioles shortstops of all time. But let me know what you think about this list in the comment below if you like it. It's coming next, we transition to the world of college basketball, previewing all the big games this weekend, especially in the SEC. So we'll be right back after this short break to talk about them as well.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we're going to be talking about the biggest games of the college basketball weekend coming up here, especially in the SEC. The SEC looking like a conference that's going to send the most teams out of any specific conference this season, but still a lot of important games between a lot of top 25 teams. So without further ado, let's just jump into it right away, starting off with perhaps the most intriguing game, in my opinion, of the weekend in the SEC. Let's talk about this Texas A&M Florida game, because these are two teams seemingly headed in opposite directions. Texas A&M still remaining among the quote-unquote elite of the college basketball world, but have not impressed against AP top 10 teams specifically. They fell to Tennessee last Saturday and now take on top 3 Florida. But Florida themselves coming up against an upset loss to Georgia, albeit on the road, but still a shocking loss where they got stretched out a little bit in terms of that Georgia team's perimeter shooting, and really could have won that game by the way they came back. They proved that they can score on anyone, but that's still a problem. They can get scored on by anyone as well. Let's talk about how these teams entered this game a little bit differently. A&M still has a game tonight against Vanderbilt, and I believe Florida does as well. Let me just check here. No, their game against Georgia was the only game before this weekend matchup. But Florida, to me, is a team that has transitioned from relying a little bit too much on Walter Clayton Jr. and Will Richards' heroics to now having one of the deepest front courts in all of college basketball. You can throw Alex Condon, Micah Hanlockton, Tommy Haug, and Ruben Chinyelu out there, and all of them can produce for you. In fact, both Haug and Chinyelu last Sunday posted double-doubles. It's the first time this season that multiple Florida players had double-doubles in the same game in the SEC. That's significant that both of them are some of your front court stars. And going up against this Texas A&M team whose credo has really been defense, I think that could be a true challenge for them. And the way they've been playing offensively, where they're a little bit too Jekyll and Hyde for my liking, could see Florida continue to dominate in the front court as well. And like I said, Texas A&M does not have the best record this season against top 5 competition. And yes, Florida may fall a little bit, but not as far as out of the top 10 to this point. So I truly believe that Texas A&M has to weather the storm of this Florida Gators front court and hope that Wade Taylor IV puts in a sterling performance from the perimeter himself. Because that's the only way I can really see A&M try and beat this Florida Gators team their own way, but I just don't see it. I think that even though Florida got knocked down a peg by Georgia, they're still elite enough offensively to the point where a Texas A&M team that has struggled to compete with top 10 competition, has struggled, especially offensively in such games, will not be able to contain guys like Haug, Chinyelu, and Condon, and Michael Hanlockton down low. So, in terms of my predictions for this specific game, I believe that Florida could boat race this Texas A&M team. I feel that this could be a game where it gets out of hand, and this Texas A&M team will really struggle to get going. But, like I said, they have a nice perimeter threat in Wade Taylor IV, but I just don't know if he's going to be enough on the night to truly contend with this Florida Gators front court. Don't get me wrong, there are some impressive players in their own right within this Texas A&M front court. I like Zurich Phelps. I believe Pharrell Payne is there now. Obaseki is a brilliant inside-outside guy, but I just don't see them being able to contain these guys. So that's why I'm taking Florida over the full 60 minutes. They're a team highly capable of doing better than what they did against Georgia. I just think it's a blip on the road. I really am not taking that game into too much consideration when it comes to Florida. But that defense is a bit of a worry for Florida if I'm thinking about the NCAA tournament. But like I said, Florida, I'm predicting, might just boat race this A&M team, potentially to the tune of, say, an 82-68 kind of score line. I think that A&M might have a couple of moments where they can go on a couple of runs, but it's going to highly depend on Wade Taylor IV shooting the lights out of the place to keep up with this Florida Gators squad. Now let's transition to another interesting game, maybe not as important for both teams concerned because both of them are safely in the NCAA tournament and no one really has underperformed against top 10 teams like Texas A&M in this matchup. But Kentucky and Auburn is still a game that I really want to see, because Kentucky has been a team that has snuck up on a lot of top 5 competition, and they have a win over Duke. Yes, it was a while ago, but they have done the business in the SEC at the very least. Otega Owe has been one of the most impressive players in the SEC all season long, but he's going up against potentially the most impressive player in the entire country in Johnny Broome, cementing his case to potentially usurp Cooper Flagg in terms of the Wooden Award at 31 points, 14 rebounds against Georgia over the weekend. And I think that's his highest point total in all his seasons at Auburn. Not in his career overall, though. He did have 32 in his game with Morehead State in the OVC tournament. That was his highest total with his Auburn Tigers team. They do have a midweek game, Auburn against Ole Miss. I think they will be fine there. But let's talk about this Kentucky team because they have battled injury as well. Both Jackson Robinson and I believe Lamont Butler in their backcourt are nursing injuries. Maybe missed this game. They still are a very impressive squad. They have lost to, say, the higher caliber top 10 teams in the SEC. They've beaten kind of the teams that they could be able to beat within the top 25, but not teams like Auburn and Alabama. In fact, their loss on Saturday to Alabama was their first loss when leading by 10-plus points. So they proved that they can stick around with this top-end SEC talent, but they haven't really been able to do it over a full 60 minutes, and that's the concern here against Auburn. There still are more than the sum of their parts. I do believe that, though, this Kentucky defense is going to be a big problem for them. That loss to Alabama was the 4th time this season they allowed 95-plus points, and no other SEC team, no matter how impressive and underrated and potentially underappreciated Kentucky has gone in the SEC, has more than 2 such games of giving up 95 points. Even Alabama, who themselves give up a lot of points. Kentucky is the only team. They do have another midweek game against Oklahoma, a team that themselves are trying to look to stay out of the bubble picture. But I think that this game is still going to be interesting in terms of predicting, because Kentucky are perfectly capable of scoring against a team like Auburn. But Auburn, in my opinion, just can rotate a lot with you and also be able to find the matchups not just in their starting lineup, but along their bench as well. Chaney Johnson, Dahad Pettiford have been players who stepped up. Miles Kelly as a perimeter threat. So you never know what you're going to get with Auburn, and that's why I like them this game. I think it could be a high-scoring affair, but I'm going to say it's going to be 77-70 in Auburn's favor. They've been keeping a couple games close, but I like them in this one. Then let's transition over to Alabama going up against Tennessee. Alabama, an interesting team. Alabama are a team that do not handle being down by 10 plus points very well. 0-5 when trailing by double digits. The only team without a double-digit comeback until that aforementioned win against Kentucky. But that's what you want to see if you're Alabama. Wins like against Kentucky, because they're not going to win games with their defense, right? They're going to win games with their offense. If their offense can find themselves in difficult situations and claw their way back out, chances are we can maybe see this Alabama team go on a deep run. It's going to highly depend on how this offense can handle those situations in a pressure cooker environment like the NCAA tournament. And I really think that both Alabama and Tennessee are very similar squads. Now, Tennessee are a team that I really like because of their guard play. And Zakai Zeigler and Chethlinier have saved their best basketball for the end of the regular season. And I believe that this Tennessee team is going a little bit underrated in terms of the SEC just because they can win in so many different ways, but they are, in my opinion, one of the best three-point shooting teams in the SEC because of what Lanier and Zakai Zeigler can do. But I have to give kudos to Coach Rick Barnes here as well. Rick Barnes picked up his 50th career win in defeating Texas A&M on Saturday over an AP top 10 team. The kudos to him as well. It's not just the players, it's the coaching as well. Rick Barnes consistently one of college basketball's elite head coaches. But heading into this game, this could be potentially the offensive showcase of the weekend for the SEC. Now, it might not project well for these teams' March Madness chances because of how bad they could look defensively. But Tennessee, and the reason why I think they can win this game, is an elite SEC defense to me. And that's why I feel that if Alabama get behind in this game early, there's no chance of them clawing back like they did against Kentucky. So, even though Alabama are highly capable of challenging this Tennessee team and stretching the floor on them, Tennessee, to me, just have a little bit more firepower both ways. They have Zakai Zeigler, a steady point guard in terms of the way he can score, the way he controls the game most importantly, and then Chaz Lanier shooting the lights out, and an elite defense to back it up. Whereas Alabama is just a little bit too reliant, in my opinion, on just outscoring you. While they have elite scores at every level of their starting five, I just don't think it's sustainable enough in terms of the stretch run in the SEC to where they can continue to win like this. Maybe they can get away with it in the NCAA tournament. That's also the reason as to why they potentially could not make a deep run in the NCAA tournament this year. So that's why I'm taking Tennessee in this one, 83-81 in my opinion. I think there could be a last-second buzzer beater in this one. It could be a thrilling end-to-end game. But I just think Tennessee right now is the more well-balanced team, even though Alabama, in my humble opinion, is just a little bit better offensively. They just have to rely on it to show up in order for them to truly be competitive down the stretch. And last but not least, an exciting Big 12 matchup, a little bit more underappreciated in my mind than some of these other matches we talked about. But how about Arizona taking on Iowa State? Iowa State really is a team that is predicated on their stars producing and then having that elite airtight defense to lock you down over 60 minutes. But they did have their two stars, Keyshawn Gilbert and Curtis Jones, sitting out in Saturday's game. I just want to check here who was against Oklahoma State. Yesterday they got upset, and then as well against Houston. That was the two games that they lost thus far. But Arizona are a team that I think is also relying too much on their stars as well. I think that they're a team that can beat anybody just because of Caleb Love's caliber of play, but also can lose to anybody. And I just feel that Arizona is one of those teams that could be underrated in the NCAA tournament, but we might choose to overrate them just a little bit. And games against teams like Iowa State where they have to win. And Iowa State could be unhealthy enough to where Arizona State could pull it off because they, like I said, they do rely on a lot of their senior talent, and a lot of that senior talent are sitting out. And that's the reason why they weren't competitive in their past 2 games. But because of that defense, anything can happen. And Arizona State are one of those teams where I just can't rely on them too much to get going. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm taking Iowa State in that game. But coming up next, we transition to another topic in college basketball concerning Cooper Flagg and his potentially shocking decision to stay at Duke for one more season. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it. Hello everyone, welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our final segment of today's show, we're going to be bringing you some potentially shocking news on the Cooper Flagg draft decision front. A couple of weeks ago, he was asked whether or not he was going to enter the NBA draft. And as a lot of prospective number 1 picks might do, he actually shocked the world and said, well, I might want to stay at Duke. And kind of along the lines of what I'm taking here from his athletic interview just a couple of weeks ago, it's partly to do with him still feeling like a kid. In his own words now, this is the only way I've ever known college. That's how I see it. I really wouldn't know how kids felt before, and if this feels different, if this feels more like being a professional. I mean, it's the same thing for kids in high school too, getting paid a lot of money. I don't know, I feel pretty normal. Now, that is kind of a vague response from someone still so young, but there might be weight to it. And I just wanted to kind of stir things up a little bit, get people intrigued, even though I truly believe that Cooper Flagg is going to be the number 1 pick in just a couple months' time in the NBA draft, because Duke are going to be fine without him anyways. But this could be a ploy that Cooper Flagg is employing to really to start to get the wheels to turn in a lot of NBA franchises' minds. Because there are a lot of franchises that are going to end up in the lottery that if they draft Cooper Flagg could feel like they're building a nucleus that in the long-term future could sustain their success. For example, a lot of people believe that the Washington Wizards could be a team viable for the number 1 overall pick in the lottery. If they draft Cooper Flagg, look at how elite defensively they could be with all the young talent they have. They would have Cooper Flagg, one of the best two-way rookies right now, in Alex Starr and Bilal Coulibaly. If you combine all 3 of those guys, they could be an impressive defensive unit for years to come. Then let's talk about potentially history repeating itself like it did in the late 1990s when David Robinson went down and the Spurs were able to use the number 1 pick on Tony Duncan, to now where the Spurs could potentially tank for Cooper Flagg. And if they were able to pair Wemby, if he can stay healthy enough over the next couple of years, and that's a huge concern for the Spurs, and Flagg, that's an elite duo down low as well. So I just think this is a ploy where Cooper Flagg is entertaining those who believe that these kids coming in aren't necessarily entitled to all the joys that college brings. Because that's what I feel a lot of people assume the NIL era is doing to these kids. It's kind of like where, the one and done era of Duke beforehand just felt a little bit more simple. Because Zion and RJ truly were the faces of Duke. And while Cooper Flagg is quickly becoming one of those guys, to me, he just feels a little bit more attached to the success of this Duke team. Whereas Zion and RJ really transcended what they meant to Duke. So even though a lot of people are saying that Cooper Flagg could project to be even better than, say, players like Zion, Reddish, Barrett in the years before, he's one of those guys who's still young enough to understand that he has so many opportunities available to him. And he just doesn't want to get too caught up in any of them. So he can say really whatever he wants. And no matter how vague that statement sounds, the one I mentioned from that Athletic interview, I feel like it's someone who's stating an intent that he really doesn't care if this whole draft decision gets taken out of hand. But let's hypothetically say he stays at Duke. What does that mean for his career? What does that mean to NBA teams? Does it mean that he's really willing to develop his talent, or is he just holding off the inevitable? And there's no doubt in my mind that wherever Cooper Flagg goes, he's going to be a very famous young man. But I just feel that he's at a point in his Duke career where he's going to have to focus on the tournament, he's going to have to focus on the expectations of that, and then try and determine whether or not, he's really serious about what he's saying. So right now, it's not concrete that this decision is over and done with and he's staying at Duke, but it still needs to be entertained just because he is someone who has the world at his feet. But looking at the raw stats, 19-7-5 as a freshman, you have to believe that those stats are enough to be the number one pick and enough to convince him that he can compete at the NBA level right now. The reason why, though, I can take this a little bit seriously, a decision to stay, is because it would be something for Cooper Flagg to be able to mentor others like him. Because look at what Duke has done recruiting-wise to potentially alleviate the burden of losing their trio right now of Kneppel, Flagg, and Malwak. They bring in both Boozer brothers, one a 4-star, Caden Boozer, and the other, Cameron Boozer, a 5-star and the number 3 overall player in this recruiting cycle. And then, as well as that, they sign another 5-star guy in Sheldon Henderson, another 4-star in Nicholas Kamenia as well. And so, they would be completely fine without Cooper Flagg. But it would be an opportunity to showcase Flagg as someone who, in his freshman year, was seen as a player who connected both the past of Duke and the present of Duke. He's kind of the guy that's the connective tissue between guys like Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, who, for all intents and purposes, are the senior leaders of this team. With his generation, him, Con Kneppel, and Kaman Malwak. He's kind of the epicenter of it all. And if he were to come back for a sophomore season, he would immediately be seen as a quote-unquote elder statesman, in my mind. But to be able to mentor others, and still play at a high level would that really change a lot of people's perspective on who he is? And let's not forget, he's his own person, really. He's not someone who's going to take this completely wrong way. He's going to take everything that comes along in this decision in stride. He hasn't even played in his first March Madness tournament yet, and they're already talking about how much pressure is going to be on him in the tournament, how much pressure is going to be on him as the number one overall pick in the draft. So I just think a lot of people are taking his entire situation out of proportion. And even though this news most likely will not be true, I still think that there would be merit there should Flagg be serious about staying. So ultimately, I'm not really someone who is going to completely say, go to the NBA, kid. But I am someone who has to understand the ramifications of either decision. Because if he stays, it would be a beautiful thing for Duke to see someone willing to not just risk his NBA career, but to really grow the incoming players within this Duke program. But if he goes, I feel no one would doubt his abilities to be ready for this NBA team. And if he goes, most importantly, he would ultimately make whoever he goes to a force to be reckoned with in the long-term future. I would love him on, say, a Portland, a Washington. I would love him on several teams picking in that top tier, potentially vying for the number one pick. Maybe even the Spurs or Thunder pick him up. Imagine that. They would just be incredibly crazy teams. But the reason I wanted to bring this into the forefront is that I don't want to cause panic amongst any fan base, whether it be Duke or any team vying for the number one overall pick. I just want to allow people to understand Flagg's situation as well. Because it's not just about the impact he's going to have, the consequences of his decisions. It's also about how the player feels as well. So I just want to let it be known that he is someone who I mightily respect no matter what he decides. If he stays, it's fine with me. Duke is just going to get a generational player for one more year. But if he goes, it's an understanding of his abilities as a player, but also for his future as well, if that makes sense. But let me know what you continue to think in the comments. This is a very fluid storyline, and I really think that it's going to be one most likely determined after the tournament. But let me know what you think in the comments, because I will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always with the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. We'll be back tomorrow, my second to last ever show of the network, 2:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as always. But I'm out for today. See you all tomorrow.